But what's enough? Yeah, keep going. Do I hear?
Or
No.
Chimes.
the wind chimes out on the veranda,
Okay, that's right.
and the wind is blowing.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, we'll start with what is your full name
Floyd Ralph McNeil.
and your parents' names,
Ralph McNeil and Ora Wagner.
and what was your, sorry, that was right. When were you born
December 8th, 1935.
and where were you born?
Right about in the bathroom, which was a bedroom at that time.
Wow.
Neat.
How big was your family?
2.
And are you the younger or the
I'm
older?
the younger.
Okay. What
I
did
was
you-
the accident.
What did you think about being the youngest child?
No real thoughts one way or the other, to tell you the truth.
What did your father do for a living?
Farmed. And the mixed farming in general. Anything you could get a buck.
Tell me about a typical school day for you.
This would be elementary, would be more interested in. Well, the school was only half a mile away, so you went out, came home at noon, because I wasn't allowed to take my dinner. Get in trouble hanging around with the others. And then you back out in the afternoon and back again, which was only a short distance. And we usually boarded school teachers, so therefore they were traveling the same route too. And that's about it. School, well, okay, it's a 2-room school. Grades 1 to 5, or primary to 5 and 1, and the rest in the larger, the big boys and the little boys parts. And of course, well, it wasn't crowded, I'll say that much on this one, we had plenty of seats. The ones you see around now as antiques, with the double seat, sitting double. Inkwell, which you never had ink in because you get such a bloody mess. If you used anything with ink, it was with an ink bottle, Waterman's that you tipped up on the edge of the slant things. Wood heat furnace. It wasn't the stove, we were modern, where the old school before that had the potbelly stove inside. You carried it from the spring out on the road, which was a good excuse to get out the air a little while, but it wasn't too far to walk, so you couldn't kill too much time. You made your own drinking cups out of a sheet of paper.
How would you have been disciplined at school?
Stand in the corner or get the strap. Of course, I never managed the strap at this school. I was always scared of what would happen when I got home because the teachers would bring home tails. Also, my father was secretary of trustees, so he knew everything was on, plus he was janitor, so I had to keep my nose very clean because, as the thing is, what you get in school, you get twice the amount home, and I believed him. But that would be the main thing, was standing in the corner or strap. And stay after school to finish things up. I managed to pull that down a few times because I was slower in death. Any other questions?
What is your best memory of school?
School out here, probably recesses, and when I could get back afternoon to play ball. That was I would say, the main thing. The school itself, looking at a map, because that's where if I was into anything or fractious, send me up and let me look at the world map, and I was happy. I could spend a day doing that. So otherwise than that, problems reading, problems spelling, so I hated school in general, let's face it.
What different subjects were you taught in school?
Spelling, geography, history, English out of the reader, the old Golden Treasury readers. And I would say that's about it. Oh yeah, arithmetic.
Which was your favorite?
Well, arithmetic came like very easy, and history and geography I loved because I was away somewhere else. My mind was in one place, so the body was there. I would say that's it. English I detested, and until about high school, and then suddenly I caught fire on that. And spelling, I never did accomplish that, as Glenda can attest to.
What kinds of things would you do with your friends at school?
Play ball in summertime when you could do that. The others was blindsman buff out in the porch, and then something like, I don't know, going from corner to corner where you had to get somebody when they were shifting from one corner to the other, and that were the main. And National Geographic magazines, like they give me all of those, and I looked forward to that because someone had donated a bunch to the school, and I lived in those. So that's about it, I think. Snowball fights in the winter. Sliding on the hill, which we did because it wasn't paid, got out in noon hours, and I had with the sleds going down the hill.
Where was your school located?
On the corner at North Range, about a half a mile from here. It's the hall now. Yeah.
How would you get back and forth to school?
You walked. I mean, that was the main means of transportation. At 10 I got a bicycle, but I wasn't allowed to take it to school because I might wreck it. So, I mean, walking. And then, of course, I mean, the new school in Digby came in when I was in grade 7, so that changed the complete outlook on everything in general changed after that. I often wonder what would have happened without the regional schools, where I would have went to, where I ended up. But that changed the whole complexion of education in general. So that would have been at age, what, 13, 12 or 13. Yeah. Yeah. Altogether different set of peers. And
Yours was the first class.
yeah, in the new school, 1948, yeah.
To go through and graduate
Yeah.
from the regional. Or rural.
Rural high school at that time, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What would be some differences in those two schools?
Size of your classes, because in grade 6 out here there'd be 2 people, where you went to Digby with 2 grade 7s with 30 in a class. So I mean that was an altogether different outlook.
And
You had physical education and a gym.
2 people in grade 6, that wasn't the only class in that room.
Oh no, you had from 6 to 11 presumably, because no one would have taken, some took grade 11. My sister took grade 11 there 10 years before. At the time I was there, there was one student in grade 10, and the rest of that age group were all 6, 7, and 8, even at 16 or so. And my future was to get to 16 and take off. But when the high school came in, that changed everything. As I say, outlook and everything in general changed then, for me anyway.
So,
More competition in the other school in Digby too. Here there was no competition. I mean, you could be the top without doing a damn thing, which I did.
so how old were you when you left school?
Here in North Range,
Yep.
I would be about 12, almost 13, yeah.
And then when you went to the other school, how old?
That's how old I was when I went to Digby,
Okay.
in grade 7. Yeah, 48, yeah. Finished grade 12, yeah.
What did you do after you finished grade 12?
Went to Alberta. Make my fortune in the oil, which didn't pan out. Worked farm work, construction work, wheeled cement till it got cold in the winter. Then I joined the services for a short time, about 9 months. Came back and decided to go a little further, survey school, Lordstown. And then it's been that, plus other things from then on.
Tell me what your daily chores would be like when you were younger.
Up at 6, go help milk. Try and stay clear of the wet tail from the cow as it slashed around the ears, thinking, oh boy, am I going to smell good when I get to school. And as you pushed your face in against them so the tail wouldn't hit you, then where they had laid a bit in their own manure, you just got your face into it. That was mornings. Then you separated. We sold cream, so we separated the milk. And probably by that time I might have fed some of the young cattle and that, but that time I went to school. And then at night I came home. In the wintertime you had to go down and open the water hole up for the cattle, let them out to get water. And probably by that time my father was home, and then after supper I milked my share of the cattle. Oh, you pulped the turnips and potatoes and lugged out to them, fed them. Depending on where my father was working at the time, if he used to work out with a horse a lot, hauling wood for other people. But they were good. They let me stay in for basketball practice 2 nights a week, providing I worked Saturdays, because Saturday was in the woods with my father. But that was generally it. But the main thing I remember is that wet tail wrapping around you. Because the old barn, the drainage wasn't that good underneath, so you had about that much water on your floor. Some cattle were longer than others, so they would get up. The tail's always drug in that.
Who would you sell your cream to?
During wartime, I went to Yarmouth because it was closer. Generally, Middleton, Mackenzie's Dairy, I think it was, which you got your butter from. But because of restrictions on gas during the war, I think Yarmouth was closer, so therefore you had to ship to Yarmouth. So that's where the cream went, which you in turn you got your butter back from them, plus a little bit of cash.
Could I ask one question, Jen? A number of people have mentioned separating milk and cream. Now this is a real town girl's question, but how did that work? Describe how that worked, separating the milk from the cream.
Well, what it was a centrifugal force. You turn the drum inside, turned at a high speed.
No, she doesn't know what a separator looks
Okay.
like, so that doesn't tell you how it works.
Well, there's you have a big bowl up on top, which you put your milk in.
A big what?
Bowl,
Yeah.
about this size, you put your milk in, and then that had the little cockpit on the side, didn't it? Went down into a round thing with a float on it. And then you had to be up to 60 turns a minute with the handle to get your speed up.
Mm-hmm.
So the milk, by going around inside of this particular bowl affair, I mean, the best thing they had I got 2 up in the attic, but the cream being heavier stayed low, the milk high came out. So your milk would come out one spout, your cream out the other, and you caught it in 2 different pails. So you had your skim milk and your cream. If you turn too fast, your cream came out very lumpy.
Yes.
If you turn too slow, you got a poor mixture. So you had to pretty well keep it the same speed and continually through to get the consistency you wanted for cream. And they wanted a certain consistency for butter, even though you had no way to keep it cold. It was always sour when they took it, but I suppose that made the butter anyway.
How often would they pick it up?
Once a week.
I see.
So
And how would you keep it?
Just put it in the can.
We had,
Cream can about
Yes.
10 gallons. probably that size, one or two of those. So we didn't,
Yeah, didn't summer. Were they?
probably, I don't
Summer,
really remember that.
cooler.
Right, yeah.
No.
The mic is not going to be picking up what you're saying. So I'm just thinking in
Yeah.
terms of people watching the interview, they're going to be getting,
Yeah.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, that's
So,
okay.
yeah. I'm quite hard to get around that. Okay.
What was your favorite holiday as a young child?
I suppose Christmas.
And why was that?
We got some candy. And an orange, which was, as a young kid, was a treat. I guess he didn't have that often. And other fruit, figs, things like that, something you never had the rest of the year. So I would say probably that was what other holiday really was there. July the 1st you went to Digby to see a parade, but that never turned me on that much one way or the other. Easter would be probably more church activities, but there again I wasn't that. So I'd say Christmas had to be it. Because you didn't have that many holidays on a farm. You didn't have, period. Cows had to be milked every day.
What was your religion?
Baptist.
And what would Sundays be like at your home?
When I was young, out to Sunday school at 10 and church at 11. Every second week, because Barton and North Range rotated, so the next time would be Sunday school at 11 and church in the evening here, so the morning, evening rotated back and forth, so that was pretty well standard. I mean, you went regardless.
Now, why was it that they rotated?
Well, because the minister had two churches. Why would one want it? Or why would one have the privilege to have it all mornings or all evenings? So you rotate back and forth, just to even it up. Because some liked evenings, some liked mornings. So if you were each paying your share to the minister, therefore you had the right to back and forth to whether it be morning or whether it be evening, so that's the way they rotated it. And sometimes they had the Plimpton one, before my time South Range had one, which they used to have rotating afternoons, but that had nothing to do with us at all.
When you were growing up, how would you receive your outside news?
We always took a daily paper, plus radio. I think we always had a radio, even a battery-operated one before power. We always had a radio. And Father was very interested in current affairs and what was going on. So, but you had your trains coming in every day with the paper, but we always took a paper, so you had it from that, plus radio. And the news was one of the things you listened on the radio. Mainly because it was wartime at that time. When I was small, it would be during the Second World War.
How much spending money would you have when you were growing up?
Nil, except if I earned something, they may give me a little. My sister was 10 years older, and I think she was through school when she was 16, so she went into nurse training, but she wasn't old enough, so she taught a year back in Sissebu until she was old enough to go into nursing school. She used to give me $25 a week to go to a show. That was paradise. Go to Digby Saturday night. Otherwise than that, spending money only as required. If you needed 5 cents for Red Cross, they gave you 5 cents, but money to carry around or go and buy anything, no, unless you... I used to pick strawberries from my father. You get me 5 cents a box. So I had a little money then. Probably I'd pick up $10, $15 in the summer. As I got older, more, which I saved, and you might buy a comic book or you might buy something once a month, maybe. But you try to make that money stretch the year. unless you could pick it up somewhere else, but no regular allowance or anything like that. The money wasn't available, it just wasn't there. Cash was hard to come by, period.
Where would you have traveled while you were growing up?
When I was 3, I was over to the States with my mother because uncles, aunts, cousins, and everything lived over there. So that was my first. Down to my grandparents in Danvers, but at least probably 4 or 5 times a year. My father always kept a car. That was one of the things he prided himself in. So we took a lot of Sunday afternoon drives, take a picnic lunch and go somewhere. Otherwise than that, nothing particular. I never got to Halifax until I was in survey school at 1956. Although we had been to New Glasgow once because my sister trained in New Glasgow Hospital, Aberdeen Hospital, so we were up there one time that I can remember. But we didn't go into Halifax. Otherwise than that, anything within an hour or so's drive of here. But that's... Oh, when I was 12, I went to the States again with my sister because she was an American-born. So she was over looking for job opportunities and took me along as, I don't know. Anyway, she went to the States after that and has been there ever since. So those are my major trips, I think.
How would you have gotten to the States?
Train to Yarmouth, and then across on the Yarmouth to Boston. Both. That was when I was 3. The other one was across to St. John and bus from St. John to Boston. Greyhound.
Who would maintain the roads back then?
It would be government, I think. From when I can remember, there wasn't too much everybody going out and doing it as part of your tax system. I don't remember too much of that, although the roads were not plowed here in the winter. The oddball thing was, if someone died, then they plowed the road as far as the cemetery and come back and would turn our driveway for cars to turn. So you're almost wishing someone to die. But otherwise than that, you probably once a month maybe your roads got plowed, and otherwise than that, then they just stayed that way. If there was any, like before, when they brought out the, the group of people to do it, I think it was in case of emergencies and that. At that time, in case of emergency, the snowplow would come out because they kept the number 1 highway open. But back here, it was, you wait till spring pretty well. Then gradually, of course, when the new school came in, then they had to keep the roads open for the buses. And they were until the mud got you. Then there was always a period of mud times when the school buses didn't go. But the responsibility for the highway was Department of Highways, I believe, at that time. Municipal, I don't think had anything to do with it. Although you still were appointed through the municipality as viewers of fences and highways and all this, it was more or less a formality at that time because with the newer plows, they were doing it.
As a teen, what kinds of things would you do for fun?
Anything to do with sports that I could find. And everything, as I say, oriented around Digby, basketball. Home here, toss a ball up and hit it. Had 2 nets set up, which I run back and forth with a ball and a hockey stick. I also had a little miniature deal, which I played with a little stick and marbles, a baseball thing, which I kept statistics on. Probably had about 8 or 10 teams, which I kept the statistics, batting average of all imaginary people. That was, plus just chasing the woods in general. If I wanted to get away with things or just get away, go to the woods and walk. Crokinole parties were a thing that they had, yeah. Not so much card parties because dealing into the Baptist church at that time, although we played a lot of cards home. But crokinole parties were the around the community. And
An older teen going up to Fred Hates.
not so much up to Fred's, but to all the dances. Once I got to go, to chase around for the country music and the dances, I covered the country that way. After 16, when I figured I was independent from then on. Yeah, dances, Plumpton, Digby, sometimes Culloden.
What would those dances be like?
Square dancing, old-time fiddle. Round dancing and square, mainly square dancing. Ned Landry was covering this country heavy at that time, plus Fred Hates' crew, and just general chasing around, period. Looking for women. From 16 on. A friend of mine had a motorcycle and we were on the road a lot.
What team had you played basketball for?
Well, Digby High School. Yeah.
Who would be some of your screen idols?
Not really that much. Humphrey Bogart possibly would be interesting in some of his movies. Otherwise than that, Randolph Scott possibly. But heroes, not too much. If they put on a good thing that looked plausible, okay, I liked it. But had a movie with a lot of scenery in it, good. If it wasn't plausible, I made fun of it. But nothing really that I could say really hero worshipped or anything like that.
What do you remember about dating?
Dating. Well, what do you call dating? You went to these dances. You danced with, try to be a big wheel and dance with all the girls. You may possibly walk one or two home. Is that dating? But you never ask for another date afterwards. Oh no, I'm too shy for that. As I say, I'm tearing around with a bicycle and you went swimming, so you dove off the highest part in the wharf and strutted around a little and then took off. But I mean, you wouldn't go ask a girl out to kill you. You're scared to death. So is it dating or is it just posturing? I don't know.
What sort of music did you like?
Pretty well everything. Country western. Madavani used to have a program on Sunday nights which I wouldn't miss, which was a very sugary, semi-classical stuff. I liked some bits of opera, always have. And the popular music that came along, I was very much into some things. Jazz I never really got into that much, never couldn't understand it, but music I loved. But pretty well anything that came along, if it hit the ear the right way. That's about it.
What did you expect to do when you grew up?
Get out of here and see the world, I guess. Probably. Nothing, any career plan at all or anything like that. My mother was always hounding, get in the bank, white-collar job, and that I had detested. So, I mean, it was just a matter of getting through school and get out of here. And then I'm back here most of my life. But nothing in particular. I did have something to do with forestry, was in the back of my mind, and survey. But forestry was a college, and I knew darn well I couldn't hack college. So I went to survey school. But that's probably what I put down in, what was the course guidance, counseling. I probably put down anything to do with math. You had to put something down, so I think it was mainly survey, forestry, something like that. But I really didn't have any plans. I wanted to get out and see what the world was.
How old were you when you got married?
22.
And how did you meet your wife?
Product of survey school. Product of survey school.
Just look at those you do, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I picked up along with surveying certificate.
Do tell.
Yes, yes. That was their standard. They lined up along the roads waiting for the new crop to come in every year. And we were just overwhelmed.
How long had you gone out before you were married?
2 years, roughly. Married in 58, met you in 56. Yeah, 2 years, give or take. Something like that.
How many children did you have?
3.
And what was your first home like?
Our first home, that would be the apartment in Antigonish. Very small, very cheap. Nice to laugh about, no lock on the door. You could just reach your finger in and flip the hook if you wanted to get in. Very little furniture, but it was $35 a month. And it was only for a short time because I would be moving on. I was working with the Nova Scotia Fire Commission and traveling from job to job, so most of the work was up in the upper end of the country, so that was our first apartment.
What do you remember about your wedding day?
Interesting. I left my shoes home, so I was going to drive back from Lawrencetown to get them, but her mother wouldn't let me take off. Afraid I was going to get cold feet and disappear, so she had to go with me. So I ended up wising, bought up here in Bridgetown. But otherwise than that, let's get this thing over with. I mean, I wasn't for. It was a small wedding anyway, but I mean, I wasn't for the pomp and show of that. Let's get this over with and get on with our lives. That was my general attitude.
Where did you go for your honeymoon?
Oh, we went to Lord Nelson in Halifax for one night. Then to Amherst, where her relatives were. And then on up to Cape Breton and back down all on a long weekend. She was teaching in Bridgewater at that time, so I took her back down to Bridgewater, and then I finally got back Tuesday morning, drove all night, got back to work in Port Hawkesbury Tuesday morning. We were married, I assume, it was Saturday or Friday, I'm not sure, but no really planned thing like that. It was up for reception in Amherst area, and then Cape Breton. I had a cousin in Glace Bay at that time, so I think we called in and I spent one night there and then came back down. That was it at that time. Lack of money. And didn't want to take time off because, I don't know, they told me later I should have taken over a week off, but I couldn't do that. I was there for a job and I did it. So it wasn't one of the big memorable occasion wedding, it's just one of the things that happens along the way. The life afterwards and the family was what was the interesting thing, the actual marriage, so what that's required by law, da-da-da-da. My outlook, I think. Glenda's probably is altogether different, of course, but that was my general outlook on it all.
How would you take care of your teeth back then?
Same as now, I guess. Had to brush them every day. At least once a day, not more. I mean, that was as coming up as a kid, except you used powder then instead of the squeeze tube gel. It was tooth powder. Otherwise than that, pattern not much different than now, really. Although I had a tremendous amount of cavities in high school. Why, I don't know, and now I don't have any, and I don't see them taking care anymore now, but.
How often would you see a dentist?
I didn't see a dentist until I was about 14, I think, was the first dentist, and he had a ball. I mean, I think I spent the winter in old Dr. Outhouse's office. But that was the first time I was ever to a dentist. Wasn't part of the thing, and I wasn't too fussy about going then, but I figured they must have got money enough ahead that, because I know it was at least a month, once or twice a week going down there, that slow drilled wrong. But I mean, that was the first time to a dentist. Then after that, it would only be every 4 or 5 years that I went then. Services, I got a checkup before I left that. I figured I'll get a freebie here before I left the Air Force. And very little, I'd say, probably every 4 or 5 years. It's only been the last 20 years that I've really gone, regularly. Of course, there again, that's because the dentist set it up on that basis. You go once a year period, which is a good thing. But
when did you get running water?
About, when my parents lived here, we lived on the corner out here. They got pump and running water about, let's say probably 1961, 62. And we didn't have it out there, but when we traded houses, I had to put it in for them and put a bathroom in for them and so on and so forth. I was part of the deal of trading from this house to when we moved back here. So roughly in this house would be around 1960, 61 for running water. There was a hand pump in here, which we had on the sink. And when we first lived down here at the corner, you lugged it in with a pail, which Glenda did while I was away all the time. Because we supposedly didn't have the money, and living very frugally at that time. Which was good because it set the pattern for life. Later on, you could have, as we got older, we enjoyed that standard that we set then.
How did electricity change things for you?
Didn't have to buy batteries for the radio. And just general convenience. We got the power about 1948. There were very few utensils except lights to start with, and then gradually a fridge and iron came as the money came available. But I suppose the reading, you'd be able to read a lot better than the oil lamps. You had a light in your room, so you go up there and read. But generally, I mean, just general convenience improvement. I mean, no great big change, but it was sure better than my mother would have enjoyed it much more. You didn't have to clean the lamp chimneys every day, and didn't have the kerosene around, and much more convenient, I'll put it that way.
How far away would the doctor have been?
There was a doctor in Barton at the time I was born. He came back, and that's when I was delivered here. And that lasted up until probably 1950. I think he retired and left, and then after that it was Digby. At that time they still made house calls. Even when we were living down here, the doctors would still come, and so you didn't have to take a kid when he was sick. But everything was Digby or Weymouth. So that's, when you're looking, 10, 15 miles.
What are some home remedies that you would remember from being younger?
Camphrated oil.
What would that be used for?
Congestion. You loaded it on your chest, and the fumes. I swore by it. I mean, because I had a lot of colds and so on and so forth as a kid. My mother used mustard, which would burn the hide off of anything. I couldn't stand that. Another thing, I always had Scott's emulsion, which was a cod liver oil deal, which I kind of liked the taste of that, though. It wasn't bad. Otherwise than that, not a heck of a lot. One time, I don't know, I was getting run down and listless, I guess. And the doctor made their own mixtures of stuff like tastes like creosote out of a stove, but it did the job. It pepped me up, put some zip in me. So, otherwise than that, I don't think there was too much. Aspirin, if you really need to, but I don't think I ever used maybe one a year. Well, Raleigh's Medicaid ointment for chapped lips, chapped hands, and stuff like that. But otherwise than that, I didn't use too much. I mean, there was all kinds of patent medicines kicking around, Dodd's kidney pills and things like that. But I mean, I didn't use them. That was, Father always used that.
How much of what you needed would you make yourself?
Well, all your vegetables we grew pretty well. We had hens, so we had eggs when we were allowed to eat them, because then she took those to the store and traded off for other things. Mittens, of course, were knit and things like that, but we didn't have sheep, so therefore you had to buy the yarn. Otherwise, the rest of the clothing pretty well was bought, except for flour bags that were bleached out for pillowcases and things like that. I don't think I ever wore them as clothes. A lot of the jokes said as they wore the Quaker man's face on their arse for some families, but we never got to that point. We used to bleach ours out and make pillowcases, Mum used to, out of them, and the odd sheet too, I think. So together with the flour bags, that would be from the 100-pound flour bags. Pillows, yeah. The feathers from the hens we killed, because we used to kill probably 10 or 12 hens, so you have to put you through the winter, because we got new ones every year. Rotated them so to keep the young crop coming. Always had pigs, so we had 1 or 2 pigs we killed, now and then a beef if we couldn't sell them, but salt beef wasn't one of the things that Mother and Father liked, or I didn't like salt meat period, but we did live on salt pork. Trade vegetables sometimes for salt mackerel and herring, which I wasn't too fond of, but that was the deal. From down the neck they would trade back and forth. You didn't spend too much outside. It would be your clothing, your footwear, which you didn't grow yourself.
What other things would you barter for?
Well, the eggs you sold would have went for salt, pepper, molasses, vinegar.
Peanut butter?
That was a big treat. That was almost a Christmas treat, peanut butter. Now, come now. Yeah. No, I mean, because on things like that, you had your own preserves. Pumpkin preserves, strawberry preserves, because we grew our own, and apples, and baked apples, again from the apples our own. So it would just be your spices. Yeast for bread you'd get to the store. That was one of the things. But odds and ends that you couldn't grow on the place, you used your eggs to trade for that. And of course your feed for the cattle and stuff like that, that had to be paid for by the wood you cut, or from selling cattle. So whatever you could scrape up at a buck here and a buck there.
When somebody in the community died, how would the funeral have been handled?
Well, the first, I think, I can remember, like my great-grandmother, the family laid them out. I presume you had a undertaker would have to come possibly and do whatever they do. And the body remained at home, and it was picked up and taken to the church, and then from the church to the cemetery. Because the only one I really remember of would be my great-grandmother. I was 7 when she died. That's the only one I really had any close, any more close in the family died. It was same as now. Body was taken to the funeral home and so on, but that again was in the mid-50s when my grandparents died. And I mean, there were stories about laying this one out and that again when I was a kid. So I mean, that I don't know when the change came from leaving them at home to funeral home. And what viewing there was viewing in the church after that. You didn't go to the funeral home and view them like you do now, because I don't think they were set up for it. So the church, the body was in the church probably an hour or so before, where everybody could run up and look at it. Detestable.
When would people in the community get together for a good time?
Here, not so much a regular deal, although sometimes we'd set one up probably once a month. But through the church, probably activities here and there. We'd have a social somewhere, or small gatherings, such as like my parents would go to another place to play cards or back and forth, foursome, something like that. They'd come back here, but any larger thing would be probably something to do with choir, and we used to, as I say, have a lot of crokinole parties, but probably what would it be was somebody's birthday. So they'd all gather one place, and the birthday party would be a crokinole party. I don't remember much about presents. I don't think presents were given. It was just bring food and so on and so forth. But I don't think it was any scheduled regular thing. It had to be a reason. So somebody's birthday, somebody's anniversary, something like that. It would be good to get together at the what roads were clear and so on and so forth.
How old were you when you started your very first job?
What do you mean, a part-time job?
Yeah, it could be part-time.
Job working on the farm. I started that when I could big enough to walk. But okay, outside, nothing much until I left school, because there was always plenty of work here. And Father and I used to work out together on the things that he would pick up. He always dug all the graves, so I helped him, so I got a little money that way. We dug a couple of wells one year. That was the year because I was late starting grade 12, because we finished that up because I wanted that cash. Did some dragging Christmas trees around, but nothing as far as steady work at all, except on the farm here until I left home. And then after that it was this, that, and the other, but I suppose the really first job was in Alberta. Except for, as I say, odds and ends. Somebody wanted a man for something, I was help them do this, help do that, anything for a buck.
When you started working steady, what was that job like?
Well, the first was driving a tractor baling straw in Alberta. Then from that, after that, I was wheeling concrete on a bridge in Edmonton. Then after I came back home, while I was waiting to go to survey school, Christmas trees, I worked the fall in the Christmas tree, because there was a family here that shipped a lot of Christmas trees, so I worked with them, and then went in the woods cutting wood to pick up a little extra cash. Well, then after that, it was something to do with survey. So after survey school, I went to Ottawa federal government for a couple of years, and back with Nova Scotia Power.
How dangerous would the work have been that you were doing?
Pardon me?
How dangerous would the work have been that you were doing?
I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, you could get caught in the power takeoff and take a leg and arm off very easily, but lucky I didn't. Let's put it this way. But I mean, any farm work is dangerous, any woods work is dangerous. You either keep your eyes open, or you're lucky, or you get yourself mangled up. When I was working in Alberta, the fellow in the next field to me, I think he went to sleep, went down and had an arm taken off on a swather. The cutter bar hauled him into it. luckily I wasn't happened to be working right not too far away from him that day, but things can happen, and with all the freaking power gear and that, especially when I wasn't used to it, because a horse, we worked with a horse home. But how dangerous is it? Same as any mechanized stuff. The possibilities there, you could take a leg off any time. But
What would your wages have been like back then?
bailing, I got sent a bail. If I got a good day in, I could get $15. That'd be 1,500 bales if I could push that many through with a tractor. Edmonton, when I went there, I thought I was in paradise. I was getting $1.30 an hour. Home, 50 cents an hour is what I worked at around here. That was the, but it went a long ways. Things are much cheaper then. And your wants were very small too.
First year's salary with power commission.
I don't know, when I came down with them, about $210 a month, I think it was. And then I got a raise at $235. Services, I was getting $187 a month.
What memories do you have of the Depression?
Actually, I have none any more than I was born in it, and the results of it I was brought up under. No money, no money, no money. And I mean, I can remember with, I suppose, the results of it, you were still getting about $2 for a cord of wood. Even after the war started, things had started picking up for some, but the farm, it didn't pick up for quite a few years, so I can vaguely remember that. The one thing that really sticks with me is going, I suppose I'd be about 3 or 4, going down the field here in where we dumped our trash at that time. My father digging out a pair of lumberman rubbers, which were the old gumshoes about that high, bringing them home, getting the water out of them and drying and patching them up because he didn't have the $2 to buy a new pair. That is one thing that's always stuck with me, because he threw them away in the spring figuring he'd have money in the fall for it, and then he had to go down that fall because he didn't have the $2, and patched them up with what we used to call cobble sole. It was like you rolled it out like bread and slapped it on the cracks. But that, I think, would be my most vivid memory of Depression. Except that why I'm here is Depression, because my father was in the States and he lost his job in 1929 and came home. Otherwise, than that, it had been Depression, I'd have been an American. Because my mother never wanted to come back here. But that's about all, because when I got old enough to work, I think my generation has been one of the luckiest ones to come along, because we had our feet grounded in the Depression with the outlook of that, and never had problems getting a job. Never had. If I wanted a job, I went and got it. If I didn't like it, I quit and got another one. I mean, there was never this, never drew unemployment insurance or anything else. I mean, I think I have probably been one of the luckiest, in my idea, one of the generations going. Although things are, I think now they should be far better, but the attitude is, I want immediately. Whereas our generation, you didn't, and when you got it, you were sure happy, and our expectations weren't that great, and anytime we wanted anything, we had it. We could get it. There was always a way clear. But how much is that? Again, back to the Depression with the Depression thinking. Don't get anything unless you can afford it. Stay away from payments. Stay clear of mortgages. That was drilled in from this high up. And it pays off, I think.
What memories do you have of the war?
Wanting it to last long enough so I could go. That was one of the big things. The ones around here coming home on vacations, uniforms, although most of the time they were pretty well loaded time they got here, because at Digby in the liquor store and then out on the train. But that would be the main thing, seeing them come home, listening to all the reports on the radio, getting a map and finding out where all this was taking place. And a lot of dramatic stories on the radio about pertaining to war. I mean, I ate those up like everything, just enjoyed that. The rationing didn't affect me that much because I wasn't driving a car, and we always had enough to get by on because of the strawberries, peddling strawberries. We got an extra gas coupons, and as far as, no, we didn't have trouble with butter, sugar, like that, nothing is. And the meat rationing, we didn't worry about that because we had our own meat. So there wasn't too many things that way about the war. Just that I wanted to go. Foolishness.
How would people plan for hard times or retirement?
Well, being brought up on a farm, you didn't know what your income was. You didn't have a clue. So therefore you had to be very saving with everything because you didn't know what you're going to get for wood. Like strawberries was a cash crop we had, but you didn't know what kind of a crop you're getting. You didn't know your price. So there was, if you had extra money, you put it in the bank. And then if you got desperate, you pulled it back out again. For retirement, I guess that's what you had children for, was the old outlook there. Because I can remember when old age pension first came in, so they didn't have that to go on. So to keep you out of the poorhouse in Marshalltown, you had to depend on children, I think. You stashed what you could away if you were lucky. And if I had any medical problems, that sunk everything you had. So I think for old age, mainly you depended on the generosity of your children. I think that's the way it worked mainly at that time. The extended family bit. But far as on a farm, you didn't have money to invest for investments, for ready for retirements and all this stuff. And as far as income per year, you didn't have a clue what you were going to get. Depended on the weather, demand, supply and demand, and so on and so forth. Mainly wood and everything else, so it was hit or miss. You hoped. You lived on hope. You dreamed.
What memories do you have of the poor farm?
Personally, just seeing it there. Knowing a few people that were there from around. Mainly a little infirm, mainly, and from... But otherwise than that, any more than its existence was there, I wouldn't... And you've seen it when you drove by it going to town once a week, something like that. Any more than that was like the standard joke, we'll end up in the poorhouse or something like that. But I mean, personally, no, nothing one way or the other. It was there. It was necessary, I assumed, and so on and so forth. What kind of care in that wasn't a thing that entered my mind at that time of life at all.
When would people be sent to the poor farm?
When there was no one to take care of them, family didn't want them. I know one particular, some relatives of ours, I think, as my father said, he was getting ready to find himself a woman, so he wanted to get rid of a sister who was a little retarded, so get her in the poorhouse. He never did get the woman. But I mean, cracks like that, and families that were very poor, once they couldn't work, the municipality had to look after them, or someone had to look after them, so they took them to the poor farm. I mean, I think particularly like Cal Lewis and that family, of course they were a bit retarded, but it was mainly malnutrition as kids. But families like that, and that's when they had no visible means of support and no one to support them, they would be taken there. We'll say maybe a farming couple with no children. If he hadn't managed to stash anything away or had, partied a little bit along the way and booze, I mean, once they got old and couldn't work, then what means is what you went to the poor farm. It's part of the system.
What do you remember about elections?
Your neighbor was suddenly a bad guy. No, because my father was into politics and everything was good, but when election come, the other ones were really bad guys and they were the good ones. A lot more interest in politics, discussions back and forth, and I would say more than now, where now it's so darn cynical over everything. You sit there and listen to be as cynical as you can and make us. Whereas before you believed everything your party told you and the other was. Election day, everybody gathered at the polls and
Listening, not watching.
gathering at the polls and be just general get-together. More or less a chance to meet everybody, I suppose. See who the other drivers were bringing in from the other party and so on and so forth. And then in some cases, a little booze there was booze handed out for votes and chocolates and things like that. So if they went a little overboard, there may be the odd fight out back, but that was standard. Any dance or anything in particular. But far more interest because it was a form of entertainment, I think, more so than now.
What personal memories do you have of the first time that you went and voted?
Very little, because I think by that time I was cynical. Period. I don't know when I voted the first time. I missed the one in Lawrencetown where I went to survey school. I was just a few months too young to vote. Of course, there the idea was to go around and collect as much rum as you could from everybody so we could have, the rest of us could have a party. But so I must have voted probably in the next election after that, and I don't. When Diefenbaker was elected, I was coming from Ottawa home on the train during the election, so I didn't vote that one. Because I remember getting off in Digby and seeing that had changed. So it must have been home here, but I don't really. It wasn't strong enough that I have a recollection, period. Possibly. Was there election on there? Provincial election was going up when we lived in Mulgrave, yeah. I suppose I voted, but it didn't matter that much to me. Because at that time, working with the Power Commission, they were a government organization, so therefore you had to hire your men through the local rep, and if the Conservatives were in, you hired through them, the Liberals were in, you hired through them, which was a pain in the arse as far as I was concerned. I liked to pick my own men, and when you had to go through a lot of these, and the ones who went to the politician looking for jobs didn't want work anyway, but it made a good excuse. So I think I was getting very cynical, even in my 20s. So elections didn't really set that heavy.
How would people have helped out in days gone by that'd be different from helping each other out now?
I think probably community spirit was a lot more. Thinking like the cemetery here, you'd get together once or twice a year. Everybody'd meet there and mow it. Do repairs, all the lot owners, which pretty well was the community at that time. If anyone was sick, had an operation or a bad accident, everybody went and cut wood for them, which we called a frolic, which you went and helped them out as much as you could. But you don't see as much these days, I don't think. But fiercely independent and very much by yourself unless need, and then you were there. But otherwise than that, generally you looked after your own thing and so can look after theirs. Unless there was a genuine, as I say, fire. Everybody pitched in to put it out, do what you could to help them. If there was a house that burned, you would help the family everything you could. Otherwise than that, I don't know. But there was a closeness, but yet an independence too. They were not dependent upon each other, but yet there was an understanding and sort of an underlying closeness in the community. More so now because you work all over the devil now. The community isn't a community really as close as it was then.
What is the worst weather that you can remember?
That's a worst weather I can remember is driving back and forth to Cape Breton every second week as after I lived down here. But that's got nothing to do with here. But that was some rugged drives through the night from here to Cape Breton, which I did every 2 weeks. But as a kid, I liked the snow. I didn't have to shovel it. I wasn't old enough to shovel it out at that time. And I liked chasing around through the woods in the snow. Hurricanes, I don't... There was one in 39 that blew the tree down where I had my swing in, but otherwise than that. My mother was terrified of thunderstorms, but I loved them. I loved the lightning. So, I mean, there was nothing there that really mattered that much to me. If I couldn't get into a basketball game or something like that, I might be a little cheesed off. So I used to walk from here to Digby if I had to. But nothing really much storms one way or the other. Not like the fishing community where you would have disaster on losing pots and things like that. That has had very little thing to do with us. Maybe a few trees would blow up, but you could salvage those. So, and we never lost anything much due to bad weather. It just made more work shoveling out, and if you got a really bad snowstorm, you had to get the water out of the well and water the cattle because they couldn't get down in the woods to get to the water hole until you got that shoveled out. So that was a day or so shoveling to do that. But you look at it as part of life. You have your good days, you have your bad days. And you accept it as that, or if you don't belong here.
What ghost stories do you remember when you were growing up?
Very little, really. Any more than some people didn't like going by the cemetery. But I'd go in there just to prove to myself that and things like that. I mean, haunted houses, no. Weird stories, but you didn't believe any of that. Didn't have any serious effect. You might told a lot of things. See things that make the hair stand up in the back of your neck at times, but there was always a plausible reason for it. But ghost stories wasn't one of the things that sunk one way or the other with me that much. They must have been around. They were probably told. Because different places I worked, especially up in Cape Breton, there was always a lot around. And it didn't have any lasting effect as a young person on me, one way or the other. Because my father said there's always a reason for it. Dig into it, you'll find there's a reason for all this. What you think is something is haunted, there's a reason for it. Why noises are here, there's a reason. Go find out.
What about superstitions?
A few minor ones. New moon you want to see over your right shoulder for good luck. Face to face, open disgrace.
What's that?
Face to face, open disgrace. If you walk out and see the new moon. This came through from my mother. And the weird thing is, I've still carried it to a certain extent. You look up and say, oh yeah, where did I see that moon from? Not that it matters a darn, but right shoulder, that's good. But, what, 1 crow's sorrow, 2 crows joy, 3 crows a letter, 4 crows a voice, something like that. That was one of the teachers that brought that, so I used to watch the crows bit. And darned, I still do at times. Not that it has any effect, but it has stayed in the mind.
don't start a new job on Friday.
Ah, that was one of my father's, right. If you were going to work for somebody who finished working for somebody, he wouldn't start on a Friday on another one. He'd do it on a Saturday. Why? I don't know. But if you'd been working on that job and hadn't done it for a week or so and then went back, you could do it on a Friday. But he wouldn't start a new one on Friday. Why? I don't know. I forgot about that one, but that's, yeah. I can't think of any others, really.
What colorful characters do you remember from your community?
I don't know if colorful would fit in. There were a lot of older people that I used to like to go to and hear their stories. But humor they had, and would tell about things that happened when they were a kid and all this. And 3 or 4 places I used to chase as a kid for that. But colorful, I don't know if it wouldn't. I don't think that term fits for. Had some used to make a lot of fun of. Always got a new hat for Easter. We went to church once a year, Easter, with a new hat. That was colorful feather. I won't mention names on that one. But I mean, quite a few would, with the humor bit. I mean, always had some practical joke going and things like that. One woman in particular, I think she was from down the island originally, but she was a real comic, and her husband was about the same, but always got a kick out of them. And I suppose in a way they would be colorful to that extent. But always had some joke going, playing tricks on somebody, or. But not really, as I would say, on a colorful nature, as determining it the way I understand it. But there always were the humorous ones, the oddball ones that you made fun of, and especially some of the older ones in church. And went to sleep during most of the things, and everything went on there while they slept through it. And I suppose in a way they were colorful. But nothing really major at all.
How would your community have policed itself?
Oh, that's really that much need for it, really. If anyone got a little boisterous, would say at a pie sale or something like that, it hit the booze a little hard, there was always a few around that would usher them out, that had the size and maybe not the size. My father was a very small man, but I mean, he was, as I say, janitor of the school. Anything going to the school he was in, and he had quite a temper, and I've seen him rout a few out without touching them. So whether there was respect, sort of, for your elders then, because this would be younger ones, hitting the booze for the first time and going. Any major like theft or anything like that, you'd get the RCMP, but I can't even remember of anything like that. Break and entry, very, very, very little. But the main thing was drunkenness and a little overzealous, but there was always someone who says, it's about time you left and went home, and they usually did. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't always the same ones, it was different ones that would do it. And if you had been a friend of theirs, this was like wartime, if you were in the army too, and one kind of haywire, and just take them aside and walk away with them. Because I have been in this position myself, and and more or less buddy system, something like that. So there wasn't really that much, to be disciplined for. a lot of people what I'm going to do, but it never happens. When they make their predictions ahead, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And like around the post office, they were always going to. My uncle was the postmaster, and I liked to get his coat because he could rant and rave on, and they were going to do this and he was going to do that. But as my father said, I haven't seen their cemeteries yet where they bury their ones they're going to do, so it's only talk. But generally not that much to worry about.
Who would the biggest employer have been in your community?
Outside of self-employed, H.T. Warren in Digby. If there was any, if you wanted a job, go to Tupper's, you got it. But a lot were self-employed. That would be like during, up until after the war, even after the war, Tupper was still going, but a lot worked at the base. The vets worked at the base in different capacities. Whether they got their trades there, whether they picked it up in the service like plumbers, electricians and that, there was probably 4 or 5 families that depended on the base. And a lot of younger ones with got a taste of Gander, Newfoundland, Goose Bay, so they went up running snow plows, dozers, worked the winter and that, and then come home. That's when unemployment first came in. God, they had it made. Unemployment during the summer and work in Labrador in the winter. But that again was cast over from the war with American Army bases. But there would be 3 or 4 from North Range that went regularly to Labrador, Goose Bay, and some into Gander. But they're mainly maintenance snowplow operators keeping the runways clear and so on and so forth. So that were your major employers, except, as I say, like the farmers, what few farmers there were, they made their own way.
What memories do you have of Tupper Warren's store?
A heck of a pile of stuff in a dingy, dark store, for one thing. Everything under the sun there. Of course, we didn't shop there that much. We sold logs to them some, and I can remember their trucks coming out with the old Warren trucks that he had bought Defiance, and then they didn't work too well, so he got his mechanics to make them their own, and then the Defiant company sued him because he called them Warren trucks, but they were a square home-built cab, but I can remember those being around and dreaming I was going to drive one day. He usually had a crew back of here, and they'd be going in, taking in grub to them. A lot of the ones worked here, toting their supplies into the woods. So you've seen operations, and that was another thing as a kid. I wanted to work in the woods. I said, yeah, you'll find out when you get there. You'll find out. But that was one of my dreams. Of course, I loved the woods. But Tupper was a presence around, we'll put it that way. Although as far as he did have a groceteria truck that drove around from house to house at one time too. My mother did buy some things from that. Thread, and odd bits and things. They used to come around as a big green truck. It used to come around once a week.
What did it look like?
Big green box. Mm-hmm. Inside, you would have had shelves on both sides. You could get in. There'd be an alleyway down the middle with all kinds of shelves, everything sectioned off with, we'll say, thread, pots and pans, just general merchandise, hardware. I don't think he would handle, groceries, although possibly he did.
Really? So much out there.
But that's what I can remember. I remember peeking into it, had the steps to go up into it. But and the store back in Dowseville used to paddle around the road too some.
Back where?
In Dowseville,
Yeah.
Martin Dugas, because we used to do a lot of buying back there. you had to run on credit in the winter because you cut wood all winter and you didn't sell it till spring. So you had to run, they had to give you your groceries through that, then you paid off. That settled up when you sold your wood. So we did a lot of dealing with the Dowsett-ville.
Come on back here.
And he used to have a panel truck that he used to deliver some, but we didn't deal that much with Tupper Warrens. Back, I suppose, in the 1920s, he was logging up in the 9 Mile Woods, which is up towards Truro way, and my father was going to go, but he was going with my mother at the time, and Tupper says, you go. I think it was on a Thursday. My father said, I'll go Monday. You don't go Thursday, you don't go at all. My father said, I don't go at all. So even though he and Tupper, I used to go there and talk, I used to like hearing old Tupper Warren with the long white goatee he had on. They were friends later on, but my father would never work for him again. Crossed each other at that time, but there was a pie social or something going on down in Danvers, and he wanted to go down when he was going with my mother, and Tupper wouldn't go for that, so I won't work for you. But he would sell wood to him. Of course, you sell wood to anyone who would buy it. But
Harold Cromwell in Weymouth Falls said Tupper Warrens was a Jew. Now, was he just using that as an expression?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, because in its mouth. Just
I thought it was
no, she's just pushing it up against her legs.
around.
No, he was born up in Hillgrove
Right.
and started a small business on on a little brook in there, and just went to town and couldn't read or write. And he had ships, sailing ships, but very bright, very, very, very bright. As he said, his first wife was a school teacher, and she read the contracts because he used to sell a lot of lumber to New York, and on the buying and selling, the price and so on. So it was all dickered. As a sailing ship went in, they would dicker to sell, and if he'd go over, and his wife would read the contract, and he would pick the holes in it and that, but he couldn't read and write himself, never did. So he was a self-made man. Small town Rockefeller, or something like that. But there were a lot of people, especially, let's say some of the colored in Acaciaville, that couldn't read and write themselves. You never got out of debt. You got all your stuff from the store, your clothes, and then they'd settle up at the end of the year, you still owe us that. Of course, they had no way to check it. I imagine they took them for... But like a lot of the young fellows around here, you worked for them, you had to take it in groceries. So then you're out trying to sell groceries to somebody to get a few bucks to buy tobacco. Older married men that, had a little on the ball, knew what they were doing, and he needed them. Okay, they got cash. But single ones, you didn't get cash, you had to take it in trade. So he was making double, sure. Call it what you want, but that's the way the robber barons made this country.
Yeah.
And he was one in a small way, but it'd be the same type. But if you wanted a job, there was always a job. It didn't matter how many men he'd hire you. I don't think he ever refused anybody a job. Stick them somewhere, because what I remember mainly about the mill is so many people ducking around corners and peeking out, and working nice as well, you say, no, they're staying clear of work, but they're not getting paid much. But I mean, he always had work for everybody, but paid you out of groceries.
Interesting.
But part of the system. And I mean, if you worked in the woods, you had the camp, you were fed, you were clothed. Didn't have much cash, but...
What finally happened to that business?
The younger generation couldn't run it. More competition. And I think his son didn't have the smarts he had, even though he'd been to Acadia and so on and so forth. Union got in, pushed it. And competition in general. Modernization, probably in newer mills were coming in. After the war, there was a bad slump, and they made ammunition boxes during the war and did darn good on that. But I've heard they shipped a lot of stuff that was condemned too, but they needed it, and that sort of a bad name built up, which I don't think Tupper would have gone for. He'd have got around it somehow or other, but so it just petered out in general. A couple of bad years back in here where they sawed lumber in the woods. This was before they had roads in there. I mean, they didn't have the equipment to put roads. We're going to bring it out on the ice, and the lakes didn't freeze, so you had 2 years sawing up lumber rotted back in there and still in there. And they took dozers to put trucks in there and wrecked the trucks getting them in. Of course, they didn't have the equipment. And just bad planning. I think in general it went downhill in competition. Because I think if Tupper had been younger, although whether he could have faced the new labor laws and things like that, it's hard to say. But it was part of the times. But the one thing I always remember Father saying, he never refused a man a job if he hadn't been there and been fired before or something like that. But if you want to work, he'd find work for you somewhere. But at low wages. But there were a lot like that.
Yeah. So he was a major force in his community.
At one time he was, in the Digby area. I would say the major, probably. For anyone to do with wood products, yes. Weymouth, of course, had their own. I don't know if they ever rivaled the Campbells or not, because they had really control. This would be back late 1800s. But they were petering out the same way. The store is still there, but it's not a Campbell's anymore. Weymouth Supplies, isn't it? Something like that. But there were...
Grafton Bell's place?
Yep.
Oh?
That was the old Campbell place, and I bet you still got stuff upstairs that came from the Campbells too. Yep. But I can remember when the Campbells were still running the store, but they'd given up all the wood operation. But they were the major, like my grandfather, great-grandfather, brothers, and that all contracted with Campbell's to log back in the woods and then drove the timber down the thing. That would be before Tupper came in business, but mostly they got contract through Campbell to cut so many thousand of logs, and then they take a crew in and go in and cut. So Weymouth was your major thing at that time. That would be, again, I say late 1800s.
And how would they get those logs to the mill?
Drive them down the river driving. Yeah, to Weymouth. Yeah, both of my grandfathers river drove during the spring because of good money. Wet, cold, and dangerous, I suppose, but big money. You could make as much in 6 weeks on the drive as you could cutting all winter. If you were a good man. And the good men didn't have to do much because they'd get out. They could ride a log out onto a rock somewhere in the middle and keep poking the stuff around, where your poorer, the new ones had to go behind aiding in the water, rolling them back in. Whereas your good river drivers picked a bad spot and stayed there and just kept things flowing. So there was good money in that. But see, Tuppers wouldn't have come in until the early 1900s. I think Campbell's were fading out because the dams came in on the river. Power in the 20s, and the Campbells were done by then as far as a timber racket.
Which river are we talking about here?
Sissebu.
The Sissebu.
Sissebu was your main river. Although they drove on the other ones, but Campbell's were mainly the Sissebu. Because all that back area, the 4th, 5th lakes all went out that way. Uniac, Tom Wallace, everything drove. You can see the evidence of where they drove logs down, blew the rocks out of the main part, and then they had sluice ways across where they didn't have streams enough, built wooden sluices and run the water and logs down through there at a couple places, one between the Branch and Big Tom Wallace, and between Uniac and Grand Lake. You can still see the evidence of the old sluice ways for driving. And then, oh, go ahead.
What different organizations did you belong to?
Well, when I was a kid, the Sons of Temperance was a big deal, and then they had the Children's Band of Hope, so I was in that. I never went Sons of Timbers. I think it went out. Of course, my parents never went Sons of Timbers either. It was against my father's. But I did go Band of Hope, wearing a little collar around your neck and all of this. Not going to swear, not going to do anything. Otherwise than that, Sunday school. Young people's, when there was such a thing through the church, I suppose, but that wasn't where we had student ministers back and forth, and some administrators didn't, so there wasn't too much of that, but I remember going to the odd conference through the church as a young people. Otherwise than that, not too much. There wasn't that much here. And then after I got to Digby, I wasn't one for getting into things like that. Avoided as much as possible. Okay.
What do you remember about tourists coming to the area?
Well, that'd be mainly Digby. Early in the game, they used to come for like to the Pines or the other resorts for 2 weeks, because I remember I forget, there was a colored fellow that had a wagon that went down from the wheels low, so it was only about that far above the road in the middle to take the trunks from the railway station out to the Pines and Mountain Gap through the other places around Digby. So there you had that. They were the rich people, and you just look back at them. Around here, there wasn't that much tourism in general. I don't think. You had the odd American who had cabins who showed up with a new car, so they're an American. New car. My grandmother stayed with us her last few years. And of course, she'd been in the States, and she was, like my mother, a big fan of the States. So anytime a new car went by, they got to be Americans. Otherwise than that, there wasn't. Tourists meant Americans, meant rich uncles, who ended up, they weren't that rich when they got that, but it appeared that way. But the real tourism, like to the Pines and that, the system was different. They didn't drive as much. They came by train, and the tenting or nothing like that at that time. So you had to be of a certain class to afford to be a tourist at that time. I think. Now, this is my opinion. I don't know for sure because I had nothing to do with it. Like a lot of your hotels, the Lower Lodge, the Myrtle House. Lower Lodge, what's that? That's the Marla now, wasn't it? My mother worked there as a young woman because, again, Americans came down there and stayed 2 or 3 weeks. The Myrtle House was in back of the Irving there in town. That was another one. She worked there as a chambermaid, I think. Again, the poorer class of tourists, but yet they came and stayed 2 weeks at a lift around Digby. So, and then your richer ones went to the Pines or up at Mountain Gap Inn, I suppose. It wasn't that name at that time, but there would be. There were ones up there, all right. But how much money it brought in or anything like that, I wouldn't have a clue. They just looked different and dressed different. They weren't in rags.
Compare the look of this place then to now.
Community?
Mm-hmm.
I would say generally the houses are in better condition now. Lawns are mowed because you have lawn mowers. By the time you did it with a scythe, and you only did it every so often, or you turned the calf out there and let it clean it off, and therefore you had the manure from it. So you have far more neater. Neater in one way, because I'm thinking of the old houses there, my grandparents, that was very neat in their time, but and the repairs were done well. But I would say generally lawns kept up far better. As a general, you always had a few that were really good. I mean, hmm?
Store.
Hmm.
You had a store.
Oh yeah, store. You had one or two stores. True.
Post office.
Post office, station, and a station agent at one time. With the
Kind of
Toledo
station?
train station.
Really?
And the at that time it had an agent here at one time with the telegraph and so on and so forth. I can vaguely remember that because the last one went to Digby, Pat Terrio, and was agent in Digby up until he retired.
Where the tracks run through here on the way to Whalen?
Hmm.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Any traces of them left at all?
Oh yeah, the railway, the right-of-way is there. I mean, you drive up and down it now. Yeah, that was one of your main things of the railroad. A lot of people worked on the railroad. Should have mentioned that before. A lot worked on the construction crews. Younger ones on the extra gang in the summer all over the not all over the province, but from Yarmouth to Windsor Junction outside of Halifax and through to Truro and the Midland was all DAR. And we had 4 trains a day through here. You had a mail express train passenger, brought all the mail down from Halifax. All the mails traveled by train. And that went up from Yarmouth in the morning and then down from Halifax in the afternoon. And then you had a freight which carried passengers that went up around 11 or 12 o'clock to Halifax. And then the freight that come down very early in the morning with one passenger car on. And everything was pulpwood was shipped by railway. So I've loaded a lot of pulp out of trucks into cars. Christmas trees were all shipped by rail. Load those on for New York. So that was really one of your major things. Oh.
So you had 1 or 2 stores.
Mm-hmm.
You had-
General store.
Yeah. You had 2 churches.
Yeah.
Methodist,
Yeah, the Methodist wasn't actually full-time that I can remember, but it's there.
School
Yep.
and the post office,
Mm-hmm.
where people went to get mail and
Yeah.
talk and sat on the stools in the store and
That was the excuse day after school. Had to stay up late long enough to get the mail. That's so I could stay away for a while. Because it wasn't in and sorted, especially Christmas. Then it would be about 6 o'clock at night before. Train would be a little late coming, and then you'd have all that mail to be sorted. And then a whole bunch crowded in the post office. A small building with about 10, 12 people in there waiting. Store was also a nice gathering point at nights, too. Quote, and even as a teenager, I used to go there, listen to stories.
Yeah.
And then we used to play cards, play a little small poker upstairs, playing nickels and stuff. And then TV came along, and it was the only TV in the community, so you're out to watch wrestling at the Gain General Store.
What was the name of it?
It was just at that particular time, it was Mildred White's General Store.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, Walter Tebow had it. And then Lottie Hake down by the track. But there was always a general store until now. It just can't compete. But it was the gathering point where you go out and sit there 2 nights a week. I used to go there and just see what was going on, I guess, something to do. Get away from home. Say from about 13, 14 on. And then lucky if you could get in playing crib or something like that.
How would you compare family values then to now?
That's your family unit was far tighter at that time, your extended family, parents, grandparents, kids, than now because of our nursing system now with all that. Discipline, fear, call it what you want, was a lot more than you had, far more, be it respect, be it fear, whatever it is, I think far more than now, generally. Your the families out of wedlock living together, that would be not tolerated at that time at all. Be it good or bad, I'm not judging that one way or the other, but it wasn't an acceptable thing. You became an outcast, and we'll say, like the generation before, when you're registering births for the province, illegitimate, that was a big thing underlined. So, I mean, it was really pointed out that you have erred, whereas now you wouldn't dare do that, you'd be sued. I would say mainly in the extended family, because now you still have families that are very close-knit and all of that, which is, again, normal. But maybe not as many of them. Of course, there was a lot of ins and outs then that you didn't know about. And well, the church held a lot, because what else was going on? You went to church because that was your main meeting place. Before my time, it was where you seen the women. You went out there to find girls. My time, no, because there wasn't that many around anyway. I was in the slack period of kids. So I suppose a few of the religious values would rub off, where now the generation hasn't got too close what you're talking about. Like if they know what Jesus was or isn't or anything else. I mean, it's amazing. High school kids now, their lack of knowledge that have never gone. So I suppose in a way that was a, community-wise, that was a far better than now. But your community now takes in a far area, the county, possibly half of the province, you could say, because of your traveling back and forth, whereas then you were small. So, community-wise, it was far closer knit. More values, I would say, at that time. But now you are allegiant to a far bigger community. So, I don't know. It's a hard one to call. Circumstances and modern things have changed a lot of things. As the pendulum swings back and forth. Okay.
The Wagners that your mother came from, are you of the Rita Nevins branch?
They're tied into them, yeah.
Are they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, see, Nevin from Riverdale. Who was his father? I forget who his father was. Was it Peter?
Wasn't Peter here?
Peter, I think, was Nevin's father. Okay, Peter. And then Peter's father would have been John Ed. So therefore, Old George and Peter would have been cousins. My grandfather and, yeah, because Peter's one of the younger ones. My grandfather and Nevins would have been second cousins. So that would put me down about third cousin once you remove something like that. But it came from the same Wagners, the Riverdale.
So both sides of your family have been in this area many generations.
Yeah.
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 You're,
and so, and going on again, the, like my grandmother, my father's mother was a Franklin, who originally were Franks came into Cornwallis, and he was killed building a fort way back, and one was two kids, and the woman left because she had no support, I suppose. Gay, and this was back early 1800s. Mm. One went to Lawrencetown and stayed as Franks, and the other one was brought up by a Winchester and Digby, and they call him a Franklin. So that family has been here.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So they became
Franklins. So
you just interviewed Conrad Franklin.
Yeah, and he'd be one of those.
Same
Yeah,
branch,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because Conrad is big part of the Franklins. He's distant relation of mine. Yeah.
And how many generations of your family have actually lived on this piece of land?
This piece of land, great-great-grandfather.
Great-great-grandfather.
Lived on the corner and owned this whole strip through, lived out right on the North Range corner.
That four-way course?
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Is there any remnant at all?
That old house burnt.
It did?
Yeah.
Yeah, no foundation or anything left?
No, well, the house that's there is built on the old foundation.
I see, I see.
Because my cousin built that house during the 50s, early 50s, and we built it on the old foundation, but the old house was burnt in 43. They originally had a log cabin back where the church is down there.
Yeah.
He moved in from Barton. There were 4 brothers and 1 daughter left Freeport and came up to the here, Barton.
And what years would that have been, roughly?
1820.
Oh, yes.
1820 they came up
Do you
here.
know
And
why they left Freeport?
I don't know really why. I suppose lack of opportunities, probably. The 2 younger ones, Bernard and George, stayed down on the island.
Right.
See, Alton would have been through from Bernard's, I think.
I wouldn't know.
And there was George Reed. Reed was another. But there were 2 McNeil families down there, but the rest moved up here. The girl married a Lambertson who had been in Barton with the Loyalists, so whether it was through that they came up. But they had a mill and so on and so forth. But I don't know where the fallout came with my great-great-grandfather that moved from Barton back here. He came back in 1840. So there's been McNeils on here ever since.
Okay. Yeah.
Because there was a house up there, which is the one you've got there. It was just up here where the big tree is. That was my great-grandfather built that. And my grandfather built this one.
And what year would this photo have been taken?
1903, we figure, or 2 or 3, because my father was born in 1899.
Okay.
Well, Eudora was born in 1901.
1901.
And
Or 1900.
2 years after your father.
Was it? Yeah, because they wanted to be in this house before she was born, so I was thinking, is this 100 years old or is it only 99?
Well, they got in here just
Before she was
Christmas,
born, yeah.
Before Christmas.
Oh, yeah, right.
And she was born,
Born in February,
March
yeah, right.
the next year. So she was born in 1901.
Right.
This is Floyd's father.
Okay, yeah.
And this is this is his other aunt that died, but she was born in 1903 in the spring. So this was taken that summer. You've got leaves
Yeah.
off, so that was taken 1903. But that house was just up there past that
Where that big spruce
And
is.
is
Yeah.
Floyd's grandfather one of these gentlemen?
Yeah,
Grandfather and great-grandfather.
great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather, but
And-
his
and-
father's father.
I think this is his
The
father.
fellow on the left here.
I think
I'm going to
so.
come back with a coffee stand. I think you can get a shot of that. But
Yeah, that's
That's
Leonard, and this would be Charles.
great uncle.
Yeah, that went down
That's
to
your-
Virginia. That was my great-grandfather,
What a
Jim.
fine looking.
And his great-grandmother.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
Sarah Sabin.
Sabin?
Oh, we're
Yeah.
tied into Sabins.
You just can't get
Heavy.
away from here.
No. No, she is my great-grandmother. And then George Wagner married her sister.
Oh,
So my mother and father were second cousins through the Sabins.
well, well, well.
Simon DeLong Sabins from back in New Tuscan.
Okay. This, I've studied photography at the art college, and this was such a normal way to have your picture taken. The whole family came out and stood very formally in front.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
And that would
yes.
have been a fairly long exposure, too, to get
It would
that.
have to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, get
Yeah.
that. And have them standing still.
Yeah, so nobody was too smiley.
No.
That's
It
right.
wasn't pleasure.
So this house you're saying is gone now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I finished tearing it down.
Oh, yeah.
It was my uncle lived there, and then he moved out to the corner to take our grandparents, and it kept going down, and then I bought the place, and it was gone too far for them.
Too bad, yeah.
Yeah.
This house is also gone. It was up here and,
This is not the one that was at the corner, though.
No.
this is Hill Grove, but this
Yeah.
is another family.
No, North Range, but it's just up
Yeah.
the road a ways.
Yeah, it's another family grouping.
This is the
This is the
Franklins and Fosters.
Yeah,
Okay, Franklin's. Yeah.
and this is the one that
The lady on the far left, yeah.
is
Sarah.
Sarah.
Oh, okay.
She wasn't supposed to be in it, so
And
she
that's
stood
why
off by
she's
herself.
moving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's
Off by
back. She's
herself.
back there, and they
Yeah.
weren't supposed to put her in that picture because that wasn't her family.
Aha. And look at, they got the horses out because
Yeah.
they would have been proud of them. And
See,
look at the
there's
little
my
outfit.
father.
Is that your father, that
Yeah,
little
so this would have been a year before this one was
2
taken,
years,
probably,
2
or 2
years.
years maybe,
Yeah,
yeah.
because
This guy's growing out of his suit jacket, isn't he?
Yeah. Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
she is
Wonderful.
one of these babies.
So Conrad Franklin's
Here.
grandfather would be one of these young fellows, be it, I don't know if it's him, or be one of those ones in there.
Okay. I'm trying to track down a copy stand, and I'm trying to figure out who has old photos, so I may be giving you a call in a few weeks to come back and just take a photo of this, make a copy
sure.
negative, and then,
Yeah.
because I mean.
I've
your
got
copy
the
of one-
originals that you could either copy of that or
Oh,
copy
you
of the
do?
originals.
And,
Yeah.
Okay.
and I also have negatives.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Of
The
those,
negatives
yeah.
probably are larger size.
No. We've had
You had copy negatives
made so that I could get these.
So I could borrow those
Wasn't
negatives
negatives.
and take them into my darkroom and print a photo
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we got them for each of the kids. Didn't
What
we?
a nice thing to
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
So wonderful. Now, Glenda, your last name was?
Was Alan. I was
You're from the Valley.
I was from Morristown. My parents were from Cumberland County.
Okay. Well, we're not going to talk to you.
No. No, I know.